Hi, welcome back to my channel. I'm Ivana. It is so nice to see you, and I'm here to continue reviewing some of my recent reads. Now, I'm on my third cold brew today, and I don't know if that was a good idea, but maybe it'll make it fun. Today I'm going to share books in several categories. The first category is angsty books. I love me some angst. The second category is really good. I didn't know where to place these books other than, wow, I really like them, and it's a nonfiction book and a couple of fiction books. Next up, we have fantasy because I went through a rough patch. People keep laughing at me whenever I say like what happened at the start of the fall, and it's that my cat got diagnosed with feline asthma, and it sounds silly, but it was really scary. I love my cat to death. To cope with this diagnosis and with all the hospitalizations, I turned to fantasy. And the last category is books set in the summer because I happened to select two books that had summer in the title. We're almost in the winter, so that tells you a little bit about how I'm still trying to catch up with my reviews, but I think we have one more and then we're good to go and we can continue in the present. Although, I don't know, it looks like I've forgotten how to read recently, so we'll see how my final wrap-up of the year goes. Anyways, without further ado, let's start with the angsty books. So the first angsty book I would like to talk about is none other than Catalina by Karla, Cornejo, Villavicencio. This is probably my most anticipated book of the year, or this was my most anticipated book of the year, and it did not disappoint. I loved the author's work of creative nonfiction, The Undocumented Americans. When I read it during lockdown, it really shed light on a lot of issues that I was not previously aware of, including how the undocumented people who helped clean up the debris from 9/11 and Ground Zero were not compensated for it and given any kind of support for their medical issues after the fact. But just her writing style is so dry and witty and just out there that I really enjoyed the way that she wrote that book. And with Catalina, it was no different. You still saw her voice in there. Karla, Cornejo, Villavicencio is just so like whip smart, and Catalina is a different genre from The Undocumented Americans. I would say it's like a coming of age literary fiction novel that's also set in the campus of Harvard for the most part, and it follows an undocumented girl named Catalina who I believe is in her junior year of Harvard. Things are just falling apart around her, and she's like, what the heck am I supposed to do after graduation? Like, I can't even take any paid internships because I don't have my papers. She's very different from the privileged rich kids who she goes to Harvard with, and she does have friends who are also Latina, but they don't understand. I believe her closest friend is Puerto Rican. I could be wrong. And as a Puerto Rican, you're always going to be a United States citizen because we're from a colony, so our struggles are very different from those of the people who are undocumented. But there's just like a lot of nuance in the way that the story is told and in the characters themselves. I loved a lot of what Catalina had to say. She comes up with these wild scenarios about things that could potentially happen. She has a really wild imagination. She says things like how men write women is how she learned to speak English. She learned a lot about literature through her grandfather, who again does not speak perfect English, but he's very well versed in Latina liberation and like socialist movements and things like that, and he passed on his love for books to her. She also imagines how she wants to fall in love in college and meet someone special. I think this is set during the Great Recession, which is also when I went to college. She wants to be a manic pixie dream girl that a man falls in love with, and she describes herself as Natalie Portman in Garden State, only as a cutter with a tan and borderline personality disorder. Some other things I liked are the commentary regarding academia, scholars and people loving the idea of Latin America and appreciating the culture, or pretending they appreciate the culture and know a lot about it, but not necessarily its people. She meets a dude who sounds like he's really great, and he happens to know more about certain Latin American cultures than she does, and feeling weird about it, wanting to explore your native country and not being able to. She really wants to go back to, I believe she was born in Ecuador, and she can't because she's undocumented, and hearing about people who do actually visit her country, it sucks and it's really unfortunate. She also writes about it's impressive that she got into Harvard, but she's trying really to act nonchalant about it because she doesn't want to come off as like uncool or whatever. Another issue that this book explored that was really interesting was the struggle to not fetishize or exoticize yourself to help a cause, be it like passing DACA or avoiding the deportation of a loved one. Catalina really struggles with how to deal with that. She has access to so much more power than her family members do, and how can she advocate for herself and for her family and for thousands of other folks who are on the same boat as she is in terms of their immigration status without selling herself out. This is also something that is discussed in a book that I recently reviewed. I'm a fan, but I think that the way that Karla Cornejo Villavicencio writes about it is so much better. I also like that it didn't neatly get tied up in a bow like the end of the story. I struggled to see with where the plot was going. Like, I like the ideas explored, I like the voice, but the plot was a little iffy. But if you are a strong-willed Latina or a strong-willed person in general and you like to read about strong-willed Latinas, I recommend Catalina a lot. The second angsty book I read was a book that I bought for $2 at a library sale, and it is The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. I like this edition a lot. So like I said, the beginning of fall was really stressful, so I think I read this at the wrong time. I still really loved it, so this could also be in the very good category, and Catalina could too, but I just felt like it was so angsty, and if I had read this book when I was 17 or 18, this would have, oh my gosh, this would have been my favorite book. So The Bell Jar follows a college-aged white woman. Her name is Esther Greenwood. It's the summertime and her mental health is quickly deteriorating. She technically has everything, but she is helplessly depressed. And like any book that chronicles someone's descent into madness, I ate it up. I think it's so haunting. I think it feels so real. I also listened to it while I physically read it, and the audiobook that I got was narrated by Maggie Gyllenhaal, and I strongly recommend it. The book was just eerie and haunting. A lot of it feels autobiographical, given how Sylvia Plath ended up leaving us. You get to see how Esther can't sleep, she starts hallucinating, she has some questionable relationships with men, and her mom and her doctors don't understand her. This was published in 1963 according to Google. She writes about electroshock therapy, which was popular during that time. It was just like a lot. This is also set in Boston and Greater Boston, and while I was listening to the book, I actually managed to run to Winthrop, which is touching Boston, and I walked past her house, or the house where her parents lived in. It was kind of in a dead-end street and there were people out and about, so I kind of just like peered over at it, but it was like a foggy day and it was just so great, and I just felt like the spirit of Sylvia Plath was with me. I would for sure read the trigger warnings for this one because it's a difficult book to read, even though it's very like well written and the way that she articulates herself is great, but it is very heavy. And a very obvious but important critique of the book is that there are some blatantly racist parts of the book. I don't know if she was trying to be edgy. She insults a lot of different kinds of people of color. All of those passages kind of took me out of it, but at the end of the day, I got a lot from reading the book, but totally understandable if you don't want to read it for that reason. The next angsty book that I read was Worry by Alexandra Tanner. There's like glare, so I'm just going to show you a picture. This book just has such a beautiful cover that I wanted to read it. I think that any cover that is like a beautiful painting, I am just attracted to. Any book about a woman losing herself, I think sometimes it can get overdone, but I was feeling angsty myself and I was in the mood to listen to something angsty, and so I picked this up, I think through my library. Let me back up and tell you what it's about. So Worry is about two sisters who are in their 20s, very mentally unstable, and living in New York. One of the sisters is obsessed with trad wives, mommy bloggers, and the other one has struggled with unaliving herself ideation and actually has attempted to unalive herself in the past. This is a very character-driven book. A lot of the book is dialogue between both sisters, and they're both extremely annoying. I still like this book. I feel really bad because I recommended this to Kat and she did not like it at all. I can kind of see why. I think that if you're not in the mood for it, or maybe if you don't connect with it as much, you might not like it. But I have a really strong relationship with my sister, and the sisters in this story, their parents reminded me so much of mine for reasons that I will not fully get into here. But the mom in this is a Messianic Jew, like a Jew for Jesus, and she is constantly posting like some out-of-pocket things on Instagram. And the dad is a dermatologist and he like does Botox and all that. So no comment on how those people are connected to my parents, but they're very difficult and you can kind of see why the sisters turned out the way that they did. This book was really atmospheric in the sense that you felt the tension between the sisters, you felt the annoyance, you're just like, why can't you just get over it? Or like, why can't you just get along? But still, I thought that it was hilarious. The conversations between the sisters, again, reminded me so much of me and my sister. Like, there's a part in the book where one of them talks about how if you really think about it, you could bite into your finger and like reach the bone, but your conscience like stops you, like, because of course that would hurt, but it's like very similar to biting into a carrot. And that just keeps getting repeated for some reason. It was really hard to see how insecure the sisters felt in themselves. Even though they were very different, they were so similar in that, and it just brought me back to moments in my life when I felt insecure. And I'm really kicking myself for not having any quotes in this book because I just had the time of my life reading it. It wasn't a favorite necessarily, but I really got a kick out of it. I can 1000% understand why it wouldn't be for other people though. The last angsty book I read was The Queens of New York by E.L. Shen. I've been trying to read more young adult fiction now that I am a school librarian. This one did not disappoint. This got recommended to me by my coworker Emily, and it follows 3 girls in the summertime who are doing their own thing. They're from New York City and Queens, hence the title, and they're all Asian, but I believe one is Chinese, one is Vietnamese, and one is Korean. Again, this takes place during a life-changing summer. They're 17. They're just figuring out who they are. There's Everett, who really wants to be a Broadway star, and she goes to this camp in Ohio and she faces racism and has to deal with the aftermath of it. Then there's Ariel, who's doing an early college course in San Francisco. She's the smart one in the group, and she really can't stop thinking about her sister's death in South Korea, so she might be thinking of going there. And then there's Gia, who is staying in Queens. Her parents run a Chinatown restaurant and she's expected to take care of the restaurant when her parents retire. I don't want to talk too much about young adult fiction in this channel as much, so I'll just keep it short. But this book was about the power of friendship. It was about speaking your truth. It's about fighting racism and injustice. It's about standing up to your family and not being afraid of relying on your friends. Okay, so the next category is very good, and I'm feeling the pressure because I really liked these books. The first of these books is PIRANESI by Susanna Clarke. I had to like talk myself into reading this one because in the summer I was really into TBRs and I could not complete my July TBR because I just couldn't start this one because it just drops you in a world of chambers and waves and albatrosses. But I had heard from Kat, from Lit with Kat, Emma, and Dan that this was a really, really good book. I listened to this book on audio and I also read it physically at the same time, and 6 pages in I was like, F this, I don't understand it, whatever. And Dan was like, okay, tell me about the character, what are his traits, tell me about the world that he was dropped into, tell me about the person he's there with. And I was able to answer the questions really well, and he was like, get over it, like, you're 6 pages in, like, don't give up. So I stuck with it, but I think that if I didn't have people like supporting me through the process of reading this book, I probably would have dropped it. But again, patience pays off because it was a wonderful book. I think that this is a book that is best left vague, so I'm gonna keep this very, very vague. So I love this book because it had a very original premise. I also like that it had a very endearing main character. I love him so much. I'm so curious because they're actually adapting this into a film, and I'm curious about how it's gonna go because I feel like you can really mess it up. I like how this book deals with treating our surroundings, our environment, and the dead with reverence and respect and having integrity. This book is set in like a labyrinth, and again, I can't tell you much of what happens, but it's very, very cinematic and immersive and almost kind of like thriller-like. Like, I feel like this book defies any kind of genre, and it could have had a cheap twist at the end and it didn't, and I love that. I also liked what it had to say about trauma and how to deal with it. And I also loved what it had to say about loneliness, solitude, and companionship. So if you're into those themes, and if you're not easily intimidated, I would totally check this book out because it was unlike anything I'd read in a while, and I loved it. The next book I read that was very good was none other than Assata, an autobiography by Assata Shakur. So this was an accessible look at Assata Shakur's life, specifically what led to her radicalization and how she came to join groups such as the Black Liberation Army and the Black Panthers. The story starts with her being chained to a hospital bed after a high-speed car chase in the interstate and the different parts of her life that led to her joining this movement. We do know that Assata escaped prison eventually and is now living in Cuba, so it's just very thrilling. It's been a while since I finished this book, but I absolutely loved Assata's candor, despite the odds, despite being pitted against her friends and comrades, despite being treated completely unfairly by the police and getting called every name in the book. I thought that some of her decisions were really interesting and brave, if a little reckless, like defending herself in court. But there's no denying that she had guts and that she just stuck to her guns. She writes about moving from New York City to the Jim Crow South, and she writes about not believing in nonviolence. She's like, well, what am I supposed to do if someone spits on my face? Am I supposed to just take it? Absolutely not. So she explains the reasons why she believes she and other Black people should arm themselves in resistance. She really sheds light on the injustices that Black and other third world people face. She has been beaten by cops. She has faced a lot of wild injustices, and she really does a great job of critiquing capitalism, imperialism, and white supremacy. I am having a hard time really describing what I loved about this book, but it's a very worthwhile read. I'm gonna share two quotes that I wrote in my reading journal, and the first one is, "Nobody in the world, nobody in history has ever gotten their freedom by appealing to the moral sense of the people who were oppressing them." It's just so similar to Malcolm X. And the other quote is, "No one is going to give you the education you need to overthrow them. Nobody is going to teach you your true history, teach you your true heroes, if they know that that knowledge will set you free." Lots of love to Assata. The other book that I thought was just so fantastic was La Hija Única, or Soulborn, by Guadalupe Nettel. Again, it's been a little long since I read it, but this book follows three women, Alina, Laura, and Doris, as they navigate the question of motherhood. I don't want to describe too much of what happens because it's going to make it sound cheesy, and it's totally not a cheesy book. I think it has the perfect balance of sweetness. So I'm just gonna share some questions that this book brought up. The first one is, what should women do before they decide to become mothers? What makes a family? When is it better to hold on to your child than to let go of them? Especially when they're acting up, you know that you're not doing right by them, you have no idea what to do to help them. This book also made me think about issues such as reproductive health care and late-term abortions. I'm kicking myself for not journaling right after finishing this book. I buddy read this with my friend Emma, and we both really liked it. I think this is a book that is worth rereading, and I think that's what I'm going to do next year. This is just a really good book to read if you like hearing about the question of motherhood. So the next set of books I'm going to talk about are fantasy books. I lean into fantasy whenever I want to escape, and I feel like that's all I've been doing with books lately. And the first of these books is Bride by Ali Hazelwood. Ali Hazelwood has been the wild horse of 2024 for me. I really love her books. I don't remember much of Bride because frankly, I read it in a flurry of cleaning. I read it fairly quickly, and I had to like look up the synopsis on Storygraph to actually write down my reflection about it because I blacked out after reading it because it just so happened to coincide with Kash's hospitalizations. This book follows a woman, a vampire with a Y, named Misery Lark, and she is an outcast, and she is the only daughter of the most powerful vampire councilman of the Southwest. She's basically living among humans because she's a sacrifice, and she is forced to, but they didn't really have to twist her arm, marry this alpha wear named Lo Moreland, and she has secret reasons to marry him. We have romance, a marriage of convenience. We also have fantasy, you know, we have the werewolves and the vampires. We have political intrigue, and on top of that, we have a mystery. This book does not take itself too seriously. That's what I love about Ali Hazelwood books. It's just there to soothe you. It's fun. It's set in the Omegaverse, and I still don't know what that is, and you really don't need to understand what it is. I feel like some people go all out trying to explain it. Like, honestly, I just went with the flow. The story, frankly, was kind of forgettable, but I had a good time. It did have some weird, freaky stuff that I didn't care for, but again, I still thought it was a solid book. The second fantasy book that I read was a total disappointment. It was An Academy for Liars by Alexis Henderson. I had read Alexis Henderson's first book, and I didn't love it, but I love the atmosphere, so I was really excited and looking forward to reading this one. This book is strong in its premise but very weak in its execution. The story follows a woman in her 20s who has some mental health struggles, and she catches her fiance cheating on her with her best friend, I think. Her fiance is very wealthy. So he is a wealthy man. She is a college dropout, and she's just like, I'm gonna pack up my things, I'm gonna take his fancy car, and I'm gonna drive away. And I can't remember if it's at a diner or at like a random phone booth, but she gets a really mysterious call letting her know that she has been invited to apply to this school for the magic of persuasion. This book features a lot of elevators, a lot of rats, a lot of time traveling, sort of an affair with an older man, which is kind of like a forbidden romance, friendships and rivalries. A lot of horrible things happen to our protagonist. I was trying to read it for the dark academia vibes, but I didn't quite get those because there wasn't a lot of school stuff. The world building felt really simple. You know, there were supposed to be these people with abilities that had a lot of power and could change a lot of the world, but there wasn't a lot of explanation of how persuasion really impacted the world at large. I didn't really feel like the characterizations were great. I didn't really know a lot about our main character, Lennon, and her friends and her love interests. I just felt like even though it was really atmospheric, it was very simple, and there were not a lot of high stakes, even though we were supposed to buy into all this action and drama, and I just didn't get it. The final two books have summer in their titles. The first of these is Just for the Summer by Ali Jiménez, who I would like to reiterate is not a Latina. She's married to a Latino man. That's why her last name is Jiménez. And like I said, I was very stressed out during this time, so I just needed to escape, and I picked up this romance book from the Lucky Day collection at the Central Library. This book was a little cringy. Our protagonists are named Justin and Emma, and they meet in an Am I the Asshole thread on Reddit. Justin thinks he's cursed because every woman that he's dated, the second they break up, the woman meets the love of her life and gets married. Emma is a traveling nurse, and she has the same issue. So they decide to date each other so they would break each other's curses. So the premise is really cute, but the book itself is pretty depressing. Emma has a lot of unresolved issues with her mom. Justin has to take care of his younger siblings. And to be honest, even though the book ends in a happily ever after, that would not be a happily ever after for me personally. The book, however, did fly by. It does address issues regarding mental health, and it has a lot of sweet romance and friendships in it. If you were to ask me if I would read another Ali Jiménez book, I would say probably, but this just wasn't a favorite. And the last book that I'm going to talk about before I talk about my little joys is the summer book by Tove Jansson. I'm not gonna lie, I feel really bad because I feel like I've fallen off the wagon of reading translated literature by women, and I really got to get back on that wagon because it's almost the end of the year right now. But this was a book that I should have DNF'd because it is extremely boring. It follows a grandma and a granddaughter in a Finnish island as they go on really boring and really slow adventures. Jansson was an illustrator and her illustrations are really gorgeous, but the illustrations really didn't make the book any less of a slog. It was hard to finish it. I found the little girl to be extremely bratty. She was, I think, the narrator, or maybe not. I think it was third person, but there was a lot of dialogue. She was just really young and annoying, and really nothing happened. The audiobook was also atrocious. So I don't know, I think that I keep telling myself that I'm gonna DNF more often, and then I don't, and then I end up falling into a reading slump. I am thinking about how I really didn't have any reading goals this year other than the Women in Translation challenge. And I'm looking forward to the year ending so I can take stock in what worked this year and what didn't, so that I can stop reading books that I don't like so I can DNF them. But in any case, this was probably one of my biggest disappointments of the year. Did not like, do not recommend. There's better women in translation books out there. I do want to give Tove Jansson another chance. There's the winter book that she has that I forgot the title of that I will show somewhere on the screen. So maybe I'll try that one out. If within 20 pages I'm not vibing with it, I'm not going to finish it. And now for my little joys. I feel like I've been doing a lot of creative things. One of the creative things I did was I created this painting in the dark, but I did it as a little workshop. I forgot what the technique was called, but I had so much fun doing this with a friend and colleague. I also recently got this tiny little radish that is not showing up on camera. I like tried to hold it up, but it's so tiny that the camera doesn't focus on it. So I'm gonna show you like a close-up over here. It just fell. This is a salty radish that I got at Narrative Bookshop. I met the artist behind it and it just brings me so much joy. I have it on my shelves. This is kind of chaotic. And then my final little joy is that I'm doing something called the 75 Hard Style Challenge. It was created by Old Loser in Brooklyn on TikTok, and it's a challenge that basically asks people to document their outfits for 75 days, not buy any new clothing during that time. And it's a challenge aimed at preventing underconsumption and helping people find their personal styles. I feel like I have been shopping so much. A lot of it has been stress shopping, and so I've been documenting all of my outfits on Instagram, so if you could follow me there. And yeah, it's been really fun. It's helped me build my confidence up, and I feel like awkward on camera, so it's been really good practice in that regard, and it's made me appreciate more of like what I already have, and it's helped me save some money. So I really encourage you to try it if you have heard about it and have been thinking about it for a while. And yeah, that's it. Let me know what's bringing you joy, because I always love to hear it, and if you have any recommendations for me, because I am feeling real slumpy. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in my next video. Bye!